Welcome to a happy birthday party. This evening, for me, epitomizes what might seem to you an oblique quotation. One of my favorite little slogans or koans or mottos that I've picked up in a long life of reading is by Ralph Ellison. In an essay where Ralph Ellison says, "You choose your ancestors." He goes on to make a distinction between his ancestors and his relatives. I relate it to the distinction somebody else makes between your birthright, which for every person is infinite and total, and your inheritance, which is circumscribed and limited. And through your inheritance, you try to get access to your birthright. What does that have to do with the AGNI review? This. As a professor at Boston University, I can tell you that one of the reasons we are very proud of AGNI Review is that it is not merely a descendant of Boston University. AGNI Review does not reek of Boston University. It does not owe its origins to any university. It is not in its origin to do with any academic world or indeed any institution. AGNI Review, as is true in my opinion of many great artists, began on impulse, and a teenager in New Jersey, in an immigrant family, thanks largely to the great and threatened American public school system, not any university in New Jersey or Massachusetts or anywhere else. Oskar Melnichuk, as a budding pseudo-intellectual, bouncy teenager, started a magazine with his mimeograph machine. That is beautiful. That means he is not the descendant of any particular single ancestor, but by the great, defective, glorious, still evolving, and we hope still growing institution of American culture itself. That it was an immigrant family, that it was in New Jersey, that it was a teenager, is, in my view, a tradition that is epitomized in the global perspective, the rigorous eloquence and selectivity of the magazine. Nobody is a greater snob than a teenager. And that spirit persists in the wonderful writing that you're going to hear today. The bios of the readers are in your program, and I wish you a very good time. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Robert, Sven, Bill, Shuchi, and I look forward to hearing everyone read. Going first is the best, because then you're not nervous, so you can think. I'm just going to read a couple poems, and I'll read one from my phone, because I didn't print it out, but it's called Grief. And my mother passed away in 2015 of pulmonary fibrosis, and I wrote some poems. Grief. As I knew it died many times. It died trying to reunite with other lesser deaths. Each morning, I lay out my children's clothing to cover their grief. The grief remains but is changed by what it is covered with. A picture of oblivion is not the same as oblivion. My grief is not the same as my pain. My mother was a mathematician, so I tried to calculate my grief. My father was an engineer, so I tried to build a box around my grief, along with a small wooden bed that grief could lie down on. The texts kept interrupting my grief, forcing me to speak about nothing. If you cut out a rectangle of a perfectly blue sky, no clouds, no wind, no birds, frame it with a blue frame, place it face up on the floor of an empty museum with an open atrium to the sky, that is grief. I will read just a few more. Let's check my time so I don't mess up. I am just going to read some new poems, if that's okay. And so I've been writing a lot of ekphrastic poems, which are art poems, essentially. And in conversation or dialogue with Agnes Martin, who is an artist that many of you probably know, but she liked to work in these grids or stripes, but mostly grids. I'm just going to read a couple poems, and I think maybe one of them that was in the latest AGNI. This one I don't think is, but it just has a black trapezoid on it. It's called Homage to Life, 2003. This black trapezoid isn't named death or murder or what a lover promises in the dark. Agnes named it Homage to Life. Near the end of her life, Agnes lived in an assisted living facility. Everything violent in the world can be made beautiful with language. Someone passes, departs, or succumbs. This is called advertising. The grids are finally gone. Even while at the facility, Agnes drove to her art studio each day to work. I think about the people who bathed her, who cut up her food into trapezoids. I wonder when she stopped painting and if she knew. I have a feeling the shape of her last breath was no longer a rectangle. I have a feeling her last word was in the shape of sovereignty. Every poem is trying to be the last free words on earth. And I'll read two more. This one is, I believe, in AGNI. Perfect Happiness from the Innocent Love series, 1999. Agnes believed in living above the line. Above the line is happiness and love. She said that below the line is all sadness and destruction. Last year, I moved below the line into the yellow or the blue. When Agnes left New York, she was 55. She feared sin of pride. She tried not to talk for 3 years. I want to ask Agnes if leaving New York and giving away all her brushes moved her back above the line. I want to ask her what to do if I can't live in solitude for 3 years. What to do if my daughter cuts herself and her arms look like Agnes's lines. Yesterday, on a plane, we passed a cloud group as large as a city. Inside, every few seconds, lightning. I turned my neck as far as possible until I could no longer see it. I left my sight over there. I still see the lightning even now. On some nights, I am so below the line that I leave my breathing outside by accident. By the time I realize it, all the horses have taken my breathing and run off. For once, I am not being chased by my own language. The horses are surprised to have speech, but die within an hour of using it. And I'll read one more. I actually read this last week. Teju was at the reading at the Woodbury Poetry Center, and this is a beautiful 10 by 10 gold-leafed piece at the MoMA in New York called Friendship, 1963, and there are all these little grids. It's such a beautiful piece, and I got to see it in person. Friendship, 1963. I came to the city so I could see gold. When I arrived, though, the leaves were gold too, and I became confused. I called the front desk 4 times, and Angel answered each time. By the 3rd call, he ended with, "Talk soon." In the morning, a different man answered, and I burst into tears. On 53rd Street, small children kept on running into me. A father yelled so loudly at the boy on the scooter that I thought he knew I was carrying death on my back. By the time I arrived at the museum, there was a long line. The bald man in front of me kept turning around to look at me. I could tell by his forehead that he could hurt me. When I finally found the room, I was the only one in there. Everyone else was below me in the Picasso room. While I stared at the gold rectangles, 2 attendants talked about whether to work overtime and get paid time and a half. I wanted to tell her that there's no such thing as time, just time and a half. Sometime in the night, Ital Adnan had died. I had just seen her paintings the day before. The crowds were large, and I wondered whether our looking had accelerated her death. When I took a photo of Agnes's piece, I saw my dark reflection on the gold. I started counting the grids, but the bald man came up next to me. Suddenly, there were 2 dark shadows on the gold. I asked him to step away, but when he said no, it was Agnes's voice. Thank you.
What a good start. Hi. A couple things before I read. One, thank you to AGNI for having me. I've been submitting my work to you since I was 19. I'm about to turn 40. So thank you for letting me into your 50th anniversary issue. I also want to give a content warning for this piece. For those of you here in Boston and listening from the Boston area, this piece is going to mention Philadelphia several times. Together, we can rebuild Crest Falls. We are the body of Satan. There was God and Satan. They spoke in the book of Job, in which Job suffers because others die. The plot is that he suffers. Others are dead, his children, his 3 outstanding daughters, sons too. Holy, evil things happen. In this fiction, they are happening to Job. God authorizes Satan to make Job suffer, to experiment. The children die in a bad storm, and the servants, paired with his animals, Job's many animals, burn up from a fire. Satan is saying, he doesn't really love you, Father. You don't understand that conditions are integral to loving. Satan is like a behavioral psychologist, and his father, God, is like some boomer rabbi. They need to have it out. God is God, fine. I don't doubt his existence or gender, I don't care. But we are that body of Satan. We speak in a frenzied harmony. We all humans, are all the cells in Satan's brain, his mind. That is who God talks in opposition and in a dalliance with. I have received an email this morning letting me know my old high school, Crest Falls High, in that near suburb of Philadelphia, is infested with Stachybotrys, the worst kind of mold. Stachybotrys chartarum causes bodies and their minds to break down. Insanity, suicide, despair, brain fog. At first it seemed, the email said, like the current students were tired, but 3 girls became suicides. They had seemed okay, anxious and depressed, yes, normal. But autopsies revealed the high levels of mycotoxins, metabolic byproducts of black mold, the Stachybotrys chartarum. Crest Falls has had to close due to extreme mold poisoning. A building attacked these young women who were, like everyone, cells in the body of Satan, the mind body of Satan, who is always, like any one of us on earth, shedding his cells, duly replacing himself. I was so sad to hear what happened. In my own impossible way, I felt the feelings of an alumna. I wept for these girls and quickly nixed in my thinking anything about that Jeffrey Eugenides book about suicide sisters in a school system. This wasn't like that. It's not the early 90s anymore. It's not 1993, the year of the virgin suicides, the year of Jurassic Park. Hadn't the virgin suicides fully centered only to fully self-kill a pod of sisters as though they were Job's obediently destructing daughters? And his wife, she either dies and is replaced or bears him 10 more kids. It doesn't ever say. It doesn't matter in this sick system of gods where conditions aren't integral at all to loving. This is God's system, not us, not ours, not Satan's, who says, we say, it could matter. The email was asking for donations for the sake of the surviving students, some of whom were sick from mold illness, maybe on a path to suicide, and all going to school online again. The pandemic's modules springing back into happy action, the modules as resilient, as intractable, as irreversible as anything. You could burn down a building, killing everyone and everything, all of the servants, the animals, but the modules would dust off their knees. The surviving students were at home working on them. The email suggested we start at 10K to rebuild Crest Falls. God, did the email think we'd all become so successful? Crest Falls was not some esteemed prep school. There was an easy and fine way to get onto the roof, the starting scruff there of Bio's meadow. I Googled every single person in my class, around 400 people. Everyone was, in the parts of their life that bit like a rat on a wire into the speeding pain of online, doing exactly what they'd done in high school. The theater kid, now starring in Hamilton, editor of Crestfallen, the literary magazine, now editing poetry at Poetry Magazine. Alum from my high school, I learned, were running Philadelphia, directing all of its major institutions as they corresponded to the clubs, sports, and after-school activities or curricular achievements of everyone at that time. There were no interruptions to this astounding pattern. There were no art kids, now investment bankers, no preps, now not the head coaches at Temple, Drexel, no girl who wasn't ensconced in a productive emotional affair with Mr. Cointnert, the English teacher who was not now tenured at Penn, some beyond famous classicist or breakthrough Shakespearean noted for her incendiary readings as she was incendiary then in her communication of desire and what is desiring with Cointnert. Again, after school, always her and he striding together, once on the roof, to read their poem, co-written. It was disgusting, and it was Shakespearean. And no kid who was poor and knew the janitor who was not now the local lead at the Service Employees International Union. Fate came in and took pictures of us one day, and whatever got captured in that photo shoot sprouted with bombasticism. I had been voted too cool for school and have acted that way all of life. So I didn't know what was going on. We were the class of 2000. We were freshmen when the Sacklers made OxyContin. I wonder if the mold had started to grow in the pipes when we were students, but in its beginning incipience, the poison's hex was incredibly, I don't know, invigorative. I have always been too cool for school. That is my fate from that fateful photo shoot when the mold took its sick pictures of us like a ped. But this morning, I feel I want to talk with everyone, to gather all of us into an auditorium. Were we blessed? Now everyone who goes to Crest Falls, who goes there online, is so sick. The email said we owe them, the way we sucked on the blessed start of the poison. The email warned mold is hard to mitigate. The email turned me off. It kept centering the building as if the building were the protagonist of the email, like Job. I am contemplating donating. Yet, I have always been too cool for school. And fungus, I know, only replicates. I know about mold. I know myself. All I ever do is lean against an exterior wall of a building if it exists. My job, the job the mold gave me, is to not involve myself. Yet I'd give 100K to one person if it meant she never had to know you anymore. Thank you.
Ode to meaning. Meaning. Dire one and desired one. Savior, sentencer. In an old allegory, you would carry a chained alphabet of tokens. Ankh, badge, cross, dragon, engraved figure guarding a hallowed intaglio, Jasper Kinema of legendary mind, naked omphalos pierced by quills of rhyme or sense, Torah-like, unborn vein of will, xenophile yearning out of zero. Untrusting, I court you. Wavering, I seek your face. I read that Robinson Crusoe's knife reeked of you, that to defile you, the soldier makes the rabbi spit on the Torah. I'll drown my book, says Shakespeare. Drowned walker, revenant. After my poor mother fell on her head, she became more than ever your sworn enemy. She spoke sometimes like a poet or a critic of 40 years later. Or she spoke of the world as Thersites spoke of the heroes, quote, I think they have swallowed one another. I would laugh at that miracle, end quote. You also in the laughter, warrior angel. Your helmet, the zodiac, rocket plumed. Your spear, the beggar's finger pointing to the mouth. Your heel planted on the serpent, formulation. Your face a vapor, the wreath of cigarette smoke crowning Bogart as he winces through it. You not in the words, not even between the words, but a torsion, a cleavage, a stirring even in Arctic ice, on the ocean floor, in the cellular flesh of a stone. Gas, gossamer. My poker friends question your presence in a poem by me, passing the magazine one to another, like apes with an oyster. Not the stone and not the words. You like a veil over my friend Arthur's headstone. The passage from Proverbs Arthur chose while he was still too ill to reach, too ill to teach, and still well enough to read. I was beside the master craftsman, delighting him day after day, ever at play in his presence. You, a soothing veil of distraction, playing over dying Arthur, playing in the hospital, thumbing his Bible, fuzzing from medication, ever courting your presence, and you, the prognosis, you in the cough. Gesture, when is your spur, your cloud? You in the airport rituals of greeting and parting. Indicter, who is your claimant? Bell at the gate, spiderweb iron bridge, cloak, video, aroma, rue. What is your elected silence? Where was your seed? What is imagination? but your lost child born to give birth to you. Dire one, desired one, absence or presence ever at play. Let those scorn you who never starved in your dearth. If I dare to disparage your harp of shadows, I taste wormwood and motor oil. I pour ashes on my head. You are the wound. You be the medicine. Thank you. Many thanks, and it's now my ceremonial honor to say that we're going to hear music from the band Meridian 71. The name of the band is like what I am trying to say about AGNI. It is local and it is universal. We are all now gathered on the 71st Meridian geographically, so that the name of the band is local and specific, and it also is global. Such an honor to read with those two wonderful writers, and so glad now to introduce our intermission music from Meridian 71. Thank you.
Phil Sargent on guitar, Utar Artun on piano, James Ezewuldale on bass, Malik Gom on percussion, Lihi Haruvi on saxophone. My name is Giuseppe Paradiso. We're very honored to be playing here tonight. Thank you very much.
It's either hard to follow that or easy, I'm not sure, but amazing. So, hello everyone. I'm Sven Burkerts, and
Other podium.
should I say everything again? Story of my life. Hello everybody. I'm Sven Burkerts. I co-edit AGNI with Bill Pierce, and I'm here to welcome you to the second half of the program, to bring on the next readers, but I'm also here to say a few words about AGNI at 50. I've written to many, many constraints. Usually they're space constraints. I've never written to a time constraint. I was given an envelope of 5 minutes. It's really hard. You type and you read it out. It's like 30 seconds. Anyway. So, AGNI at 50. I have been inevitably thinking a lot about this, not just about the organizational specifics of this celebration, but about those elusive and abstract concepts. I mean, things like time and continuity and that principle of physics called momentum. I only came in as editor 20 or so years ago. AGNI 57 was my debut issue, so I can't speak as a witness to the first 56, though to some degree I feel I can. Not only because I've known my great friend and founding editor, Oskold Melnichuk, for frighteningly 40 plus years, but also because we share the generational bond. When he was stapling together his first issues at Antioch College, my friends and I were stapling together our own magazine. It was called Tracks, but unlike AGNI, Tracks folded after we graduated high school. Meanwhile, this entity, and to me this is a kind of miracle, found traction as well as momentum. And this can only happen where there's a sort of deep will, I think. So I think about the fact of 50 years, and I have to think of the forward impetus, all that determination and the inevitable passing of batons from hand to hand. For 50 years, without a break, AGNI has put out its issues. And I want you to picture behind AGNI just a vast screen, which is the screen of time and history. So in all that time, the world has kept going about its business, and now you have Vietnam, Nixon, Watergate, Kent State, Clinton and Monica, the Bushes, the World Trade Center, Iraq, Obama, Trump, impeachment, the World Trade Center, did I say that already? Elections, 9 presidents. The world carries on, and miraculously, AGNI in its eccentric sort of tandem carries on with it. So what is it that makes for such ongoingness? The answer is easy, I think. People. People who have, for whatever reason, personal and public, made literature their mission, who find purpose and satisfaction in keeping the flame of lit, who have in their character, this is my experience at least, an element of defiance along with their idealism, a will to counter something. So when I think of my years of tenure, it is the people I think of first. All of those who've worked with us directly as editors, interns, sponsors, board members, and also, not to be discounted for a second, the people, writers, and friends who comprise what we think of as our community. And many of you are here tonight, so welcome, community. So So 50 years feels very big to me. On the downside, the number seriously ages me. But on the upside, the persevering love of the mission feeds me every day. So we have 3 readers for this part of the program: Teju Cole, Chanda Feldman, and Joanne Beard, each an exemplary voice. And we are very glad they've come to celebrate with us. I can't bring up Teju Cole without saying just a few words. In a sense, one word, a word that's not much in circulation these days, and maybe that testifies to the nature of our times, but which still has relevance. The word is sensibility. It's the word that came to mind as I looked to assemble my thoughts. What other word would do the job? I follow Teju as a photographer, as a writer on photography, an essayist, a novelist, and from genre to genre, there's a distinct and original through line, which is for me what sensibility is. It's that through line. So welcome up, Teju, and thank you all for coming.
Hello, everyone. I'll leave the mask on, not only because of the respiratory disease that's in town, but because it's the perfect excuse for people who are shy of being on video camera. Plausible deniability. It's so wonderful to belatedly be part of the AGNI community. It has this impossibly eminent history of contributors, and that history continues. Right now that the magazine is in the hands, under the lead of Sven and Bill Pierce and Shuchi Saraswat, and I'm just so grateful that I was invited to be part of this one. I have 6 very short stories in this issue, and I'll read 2 of them. This one is called A Letter Arrives. Our pallets are side by side on the concrete floor. I am too cold to sleep, as usual. It must be the middle of the night now, though I can't say for sure. This place has no windows, and the lights are always on. I watch your sleeping hands. The letter arrived 2 or 3 days ago. Neither of us could read it. But word went around that a letter had arrived, and the others murmured. Later, we found someone who could read it. The letter was addressed to us, said the one who could read it, no question about that. But it contained nothing about our petition. Nothing about our petition, I said. That's right, nothing about your petition. Must be some kind of mistake, I said. What does it contain? After a long silence, the one who could read it began to read. Your life well lived. Your life well lived intersects with our institutional priorities and our talent strategy. In these unprecedented times, we are making holistic investments to target these factors. That can't be right, I said. Probably some kind of code, you said. Some kind of code? Yes, about our petition. We need to find an interpreter. An interpreter? Where do you think you are? I said. Wherever it may be, I am not here to be insulted, you said. And anyway, who are you to say what counts and what doesn't count? At least a letter arrived. Not everyone has that. The one who could read it, ignoring our bickering, went on. Your life well lived can be made operational under 4 modalities. an active mind, a healthy body, a flourishing workplace, and a sound financial plan. Download the Your Life Well Lived app for more information. That was yesterday or the day before. It's hard to keep track of time here. Between your palate and the concrete floor is the letter. Your hands twitch as you sleep, seeking warmth alongside your body. The second story is called Showtime. Showtime. He is in his room, which is dry, quiet, and warm. He is not in the circle. You cannot write about the circle from inside the circle. To write about the circle, you have to be outside it. No, he thinks, that's not quite right. You could write about the circle from inside the circle. It would have to be possible and perhaps necessary. In his dry, quiet, warm room, he writes the word killed. In the sentence that follows, he writes the word again. He returns to the two sentences day after day for many days. The word killed is not quite right. The sentences look painted, but he cannot find another word. Killed. Inside the circle, the word means death, one's own death or the death of another. Outside the circle, it means showtime. But he knows what eventually happened to the one who designed a hollow brass bowl that converted the cries of those being roasted inside it into music, their charred flesh into incense, their blackened bones into jewels. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. It's so wonderful to be here with you to celebrate AGNI, and thank you to everyone at AGNI for letting me be part of this event. I'm going to read two poems. The first poem has two parts. Glance. After Richmond Barthay's sculpture, Head of a Negro. 1. Then you read the title, which is Head of a Negro. Child, you think. A boy, you see. His cheekbones, high diagonals, soft with fat, padded, and the eyes spaced apart, the remnants of a young, endearing, open-eyed look onto the world. Like a child's, the contour, rounded jaw, light cleft in the chin, with the foreshadowing of adulthood there. The forehead will lose its smooth plane. The jaw line will cut a defined edge you recognize in the profile of your own son's face. Pre-adolescent, his brown skin, bronze, like the bronze cast over terracotta. The sculptor left the eyes hollowed, unfilled, yet they glance downwards. It's the look of a boy caught in his own thoughts. How your son looks, reckoning with his own dialectics. When you look at the careful left-sided part sculpted in the hair, and the curls lap of brushed waves. You know someone cares for the child, has taught him to care well for himself, the hair brushed so. 2. You can imagine, your father says, afternoon sunlight hitting the mute button in his living room armchair, the TV news hour on, the day's overview, which he watches faithfully and recounts how lives are broken, breaking, videoed, broadcast, by which he means the young Black people who he's angered to see captured this way and exposed, and often dead in mind, if not body, in brutal circumstances for all to view. He says, who gets to turn away? Who's watching themselves dying again and again? He warns those closest to him. He who is more often sunk by what it takes to live in this country, to drive down the street, enter a store, and so now chooses to retreat to what he sees through the sliding glass doors, his bright impatiens in their beds, apple trees, to which he earlier rose on his cane and leaned until among their snow blossoms alongside the bees, surrounded in floral sweet fragrance, from where your father says, and no one wants you to be bitter. He says that the eyes of this world are closed to so many of us. He says to you when you are 6 months into your pregnancy with your not yet born son, anywhere else across the world, your child may grow up safer, intact, he says, than here at home. The second poem I'll read is in the latest issue of AGNI, and it's entitled Shook, S-H-U-K, which is a Hebrew word for an outdoor market. Shook. Then in the shook, in the summer, on the stalls' tables, on corner pallets, pyramids of watermelon, cardboard boxes of rinds, the watermelon the vendor cuts from to offer you a slice. As arresting as the Charles Ethan Porter painting at the Met. The dried tendril from the vine, the gold shafts of light like these falling through the roof's rusted metal sheets. The red-pink seeded flesh, its unabashed glisten. The dust green hull under a vendor's resting palm. The yelling out the price over the crowd that your children answer with their hands and dribbled juice down their necks. What do you find inside you that holds you back? Black, glossed porcelain, wide-lipped, red grin, this import shelved in your chest, as if you could open a cabinet and offer up a pickaninny figurine gifted you for keeps. You watch the flies and yellow jackets in their delirious zigzags over the pools of runoff from the discards. Arrived and swarming in your thoughts, you want to find it laughable that you hesitate over whether you can eat watermelon in public as your children grab as much as they're given. You watch them eat, thus far free from discovering round, shining eyes, glittering as glass beads, odd and goblin-like. When did you first hear that? When you were young, with your cousins, summers, your grandfather carted watermelon from the fields. The glistening halves he cut on the kitchen table, passing each of you a spoon.
Start. Hi, everybody. I'm your last speaker. So I'm going to read from AGNI 89, which is my issue. And it's an essay about my dad. And they agreed to run photographs of my dad in this, not just the one that you can see here, but another one, which meant more than you can even imagine to me. I was so excited about it. I got extra copies and sent them out to everybody so they could see, like, the pictures of my dad. I know. But it really did. It meant so much to me. And what really meant something to me was that they were humans at the other end of the email chain. And I could say to them, this really means something to me. And somebody wrote back and I made like this huge argument why this would be a good idea. And they just wrote back and said, Sven said fine. Oh, okay. So this is an essay that I wrote about trying to write an essay. And so it's like a regular length essay, so I'm just going to start it and read for however long 8 minutes is. But now we're 1 minute 33 in. It's called Now. The day is finally here. I've done everything else possible several times. Reading, sleeping, musing, reading, hanging out with people, sitting outside in the lawn chair in the heat, feeding the birds cracked corn on the stone wall, witnessing a very gentle fight between a chipmunk and a mourning dove, choosing sides because the mourning dove was taking one tiny grain at a time while the chipmunk was vacuuming the length of the stone wall like a carpet. Reading some more and then more, driving the dog around slowly on our country roads for an hour each evening so she could smell the night air, letting other cars pass us in the dark, listening to Terry Gross ask people questions and then to their answers. Dion DiMucci, he of the Belmonts, surprising me with his keen mind and his obsessive love and encyclopedic knowledge of not just doo-wop, but all music. Why would it be surprising that Dion knows a lot about music? Think it through. Pay attention. Remember what Sherman Alexie said that time, and how you pulled over to write it down on a receipt and then forgot the end of it and had to listen to the whole interview again the next night so you could pull over and write down the second half of one sentence. Remember what X said and how it annoyed enough that you thought, oh, please, this is why the world hates a memoirist. Remember what Bruce Springsteen said and how it thrilled enough that you thought, this is why the world loves a memoirist. Remember what Astrid something, the woman who created the look for the Beatles, said. And remember how it made you think of John, who had a guy crush on Astrid's boyfriend Stuart, a young man who politely refused to join the Beatles. He wouldn't have lived to regret it either, even if he hadn't died soon after from a brain aneurysm. Stuart was that certain of an artist. Forget, of course, everything Terry Gross said, because she's so good at her job that she isn't what we remember. I like people who are good at their jobs, but I'm not one of them. Which is why you'll notice that everything I did this summer until today, the day I finally sat down to write the Alaska talk, did not have the word writing in it. But now I am writing, because it's on my calendar and it's on my mind, though what Dion has to do with Alaska, I don't know. He sounded like someone's dad, old now, but still young in the way that rock and roll guys stay young. I remember something else suddenly, how my own dad was not a rock and roll guy, but looked, in his younger days, just like Buddy Holly. And there it is. If you muse long enough, you get to it. I wanted to go to Alaska because that's where my dad spent his war years, the only time in his life that he traveled anywhere farther than a fishing cabin on some Midwestern lake. A small town, dirt poor Illinois boy who got sent out with one brother or another every afternoon to bring back dinner for the family. Tramping through cornfields and woods with a shotgun and a couple of dogs, always dogs, and then tramping back with a squirrel or a rabbit for dinner. Using bamboo rods to catch walleye out of somebody's pond or out of the Edwards River. My dad, who learned sports from a teacher at their rural school, Miss Laura Smith, who tucked her long skirts into her bloomers and taught my dad and the other guys to pole vault. He said, "Boy, she could do the long jump. You ought to seen her, and she taught me to sprint." He told me years later that after Laura Smith died, at her funeral in the little town, a town so drab and meaningless, stunted, that the only funeral parlor was called Crummie's. Rows and rows of men came in their stiff, good clothes with weathered faces and white foreheads, the telltale sign of a farmer at a funeral, to pay their respects to the coach who had taught them layups. Anyway, my dad got called up for World War II and was sent to California for his training. I love the word presidio. It sounded like a foolish leader, the presidio, or a musical instrument. Lots of things happened to him there. He was crudely circumcised, for one, carried to and from the mess hall for days afterward by his horrified and sympathetic buddies, and he was laid up in a ditch during a training maneuver and left there, ankle sprained, for 12 hours in the hot sun, provoking forever after the question he would pose to me, "Honey, does your dog have plenty of water?" He couldn't even fire his gun to announce his dilemma because they were training with wooden rifles. See, I know the stories very well. I listened to him then the way I listen to Terry Gross now. He grew close to the men in his unit, the guys who winced over his sore dick with him and crouched in small groups smoking cigarettes to have their pictures taken. But before they were all sent to the European theater, my dad was plucked out of the mix and made to go to Alaska. This disappointed him terribly. He wanted to be with his buddies, but most likely saved his life. Laura Smith actually saved his life. Some general in Alaska was worried that his men stationed there were withering away from boredom, so he flew from base to base to recruit a basketball team, which is why Beard, with his long legs and his Buddy Holly glasses and his small-town ball skills, had to take leave of his unit and get on a ship that toiled its way to Kodiak Island, the men vomiting over the steel sides into the churning waters. Thank you.
We've come to near the end, and after these months of preparation, it's very hard to believe. Thank you to our readers. It's been quite a ride. Thank you very much. We can see all around us the importance of things that people have built and maintained with their work, and the loss when those spaces are destroyed, or the lack where they've failed to develop or don't find sufficient shelter and resources to flourish. So many have lost so much in these years. The feeling I most want to celebrate in response to that is the fusion of continuity and evolution. It's not just about survival. It's about thriving in ways that make survival worth a damn. So continuity gives us something, and change gives us something. Why do we have so many people working on the magazine now? There are about 20 of us. Many were able to fly in tonight. The rest are streaming in. And they've been buzzing our pockets with Slack notes saying how good the sound is. The magazine receives over 16,000 submissions a year. We could have a transient group of readers considering them, constantly revolving. Instead, there's us, for focused commitment and exchange, a group large enough to take on the work and stable enough that we are swayed by each other's attachments and interests and needs. Because of that commitment, we already know with precision what the theme of the next 50 years will be. It will be discovery, uncovering, finding, bringing forward, magnifying, and igniting. AGNI is a conversation of discovery. Not just my discovery or hers or theirs, but in each case, a writer's urgency finding ours in a process very much not led by consensus, and then being found by our readers. Discovery is what animated the founding of the magazine 50 years ago, and it keeps the work of AGNI vital to us now. We're fortunate to have our independence within the shelter of Boston University. Our colleagues at BU, year by year, renew their commitment to the arts through us and assert with their trust in us that the arts have value only when they're unfettered. We're grateful that the battle AGNI joins nationally and internationally is not one we have to fight here at home. I want to thank my comrade in the work that went into this event, our associate editor, Shuchi Saraswat. And then from both of us and from Sven also, our honorary co-chairs for the 50th, Charles Coe and Cecily Miller. Thank you to the Thank you to the donors who gave generously to make this night possible, and also to the Mass Cultural Council and the National Endowment for the Arts. But we're not quite finished. Sven, could you join me up here? And everyone who's currently involved in the day-to-day operation of the magazine, could you come forward with me? This is not meant for us to show ourselves. It's meant for something bigger than that. Though I do love having you see them all. Together, we want, still gathering, I love it. Together, we want to honor our founder, Oskald Melnichuk. Oskald, come join us. To Oskald. Yes, sunflowers for the Ukrainian American. There's a There's a bond written into the story of Ukraine and sunflowers. Sunflowers are the national flower of Ukraine, and they were first imported there from North America in the 1800s.
Whoa, no
So-
idea. My God.
Thank you for everything you've done.
Thank you. Thank you. And to think I almost didn't come. No, seriously, you know, I have no prepared remarks because I did not want to be a helicopter parent coming in to see this. I did not know how this whole thing was going to go. I mean, not this evening, but the turning over, the transition to these now eminences, great friends. My wife has a phrase that she uses about how we kind of move through the world. By we, I mean writers, readers, those of us who care about the arts. And she talks about elective family. The books we love, the poems we love, the stories, the essays, those become who we want to be with. And when you come across the people who similarly care about the values that those works embody, you know you found your family. That is the elective family with which you can move through the world, who allow you to see that no matter what happens next week, it's just the beginning of more transformation, more work for all of us, and that the work that you are all doing, I mean, it was actually so startling to see all of you here, and how many, and I have to say that Sven's brilliance in working with Bill Pierce in creating this with Shuchi and the rest of the gang is something that I wondered about how it would shake out, and I can see that it has turned out brilliantly because I chose my family well, I can't thank all of you enough. To have great poetry, to have great art, you need great audiences. It is indeed a conversation. I really have nothing more to say because everything else has been said so very well, including the introductory remarks by my old friend, Jersey boy, Robert Pinsky, whose eloquence is always a lesson in itself. Thank you all so very much. Please keep reading. Please keep writing. Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Cecily. Thank you, Amy. And everyone, all of you. Beautifully done. Thank you, Bill. Thank you.
Thank you to Amy McDonald, and thank you to Candace Springer and CitySpace. You have been wonderful, and we loved being here. Thank you for coming, everyone.